Hi everyone, welcome to episode 1 of the Education Enclave podcast. My name is Danny Heineman, and for those of you who don't have any context on me, I focus on excellence in education from F to 12. Earlier in the year, via my weekly newsletter, I offered to run a study group on a selected text over the course of the year. Based on the educators who expressed interest, I decided to focus on Debbie Miller's What's the Best That Could Happen? New Possibilities for Teachers and Readers. Fantastic text. I recommend if you're a primary educator, teacher of reading, this is a fantastic resource. This episode is our discussion around Chapter 1. The talented group that joined me in the first study group session are the following educators: Dearnne Backhouse, Erin Beissel, Megan Lillingston, Dee McNamee, Cassie Ryan, Elena Ziebell. Thanks, ladies. The main topics that we discuss are gradual release of responsibility, the workshop model, and agency. I hope you enjoy it.
All right, let's make a start, team. So my plans for how this will run are very flexible, but I thought my best laid plans always. So renewed Zoom subscription today, and obviously it's the first time I've been on, and I'm like, there's no breakout rooms. So we might not be doing breakout rooms on this occasion, but that's okay. So what I've got planned was breakout rooms, but I've got a little PowerPoint where I want to share some of my thinking that's kind of broad, and my concern was at 7:30, given the group that we've got, we could probably talk into the early hours of the morning. So I think we'll try and aim for an hour. We'll try and finish by 8:30. If we're done before then, great. Some of my thinking, I have lots of thinking. Some of it would be to write to Debbie Miller and sort of say, hey, this is some of our thoughts. Would you like to join us at some stage? Hence why we might record. We are recording, and I think everyone's okay with that. I'll keep you posted with anything behind that, how I use it, that sort of thing. So if you've ever got any objections, of course, please let me know. So I think let's use the chat for anything. I think some of you sent me through reflections from the chapter, so thanks for doing that. If you didn't, don't stress. It was more for me trying to plan, thinking how do we be concise about this, and still have a really good discussion. I think, don't have the choice around breakout rooms. Given we're a small group, we can probably bounce off each other. And I guess that's probably the main things. So I guess you all know me, but you don't all know each other. So we'll do some introductions, and we'll start with Cass.
Hi everyone, I'm Cassie. I am a 3-4 teacher currently at Cobram Primary School. I'm the literacy leader, and I have 2 boys myself. They are in grade 5 and grade 3. Does that suffice? Okay. Thanks.
Yep, very good. Thank you. Over to Dearnne.
So I'm Dearnne. I'm a literacy learning specialist at Mount Waverley Primary School, and I've been there for a couple of years. I've been teaching for 30 years, long time, and had many roles before that. I'm also in the classroom 2 days a week teaching year 4, and I have 2 of my own children, teenagers, one doing VCE and the other one year 10.
Thanks, Dearnne. Dee?
Hi everyone, I'm Dee McNamee, and I'm working in the role of the Literacy Learning Specialist at Dorinda Primary School this year. I share a 3-4 grade with Elena in this group, and we still work very closely with Erin, even though she's busy with Audrey. We're a family in Dorinda. And I have a little boy, a 2.5-year-old little boy.
Thanks, Dee. Over to Erin and Audrey.
Hi, I'm Erin, and this is nearly 10-week-old Audrey. So I have taught every primary grade. Most recently, I was teaching grade 5, 6, and was the literacy learning specialist at Clarinda Primary School. I'm taking a break at the moment. And I'm also halfway through a Masters of Instructional Leadership, more than halfway through. So that's exciting.
Thanks, Erin. Elena.
Hi everyone, I'm Eleanor. I'm also from Clarinda Primary School. I've worked very closely with Erin and Dee for the past 7 years. I'm currently in a 3-4 classroom sharing with Dee, and I'm also a learning specialist at Clarinda Primary School.
Thanks, Eleanor. And over to Megan.
Hi everyone, my name's Megan. I work at Hughesdale Primary School, which is just near Chadstone, not too far from Clarinda. I work in the foundation classrooms, and I'm also literacy leader at our school. And I've got 3 beautiful kids, grade 2, year 5 and year 8.
Thanks, Megan. One thing I learned during COVID and being online all the time is to take the home phone off the hook, and I didn't do it tonight. So anyway, we'll see how we go. We can always edit the recording. So, but thanks for the introductions. Very talented group here. I guess I want to share some of my thinking around why I chose this text, and to also thank you all for agreeing to be part of this. So we may have some other colleagues join us in subsequent sessions. Hopefully you can make it to all of them. But I guess I wanted to, I think most, if not all of you, realise that I've been trying to write a bit online and engage in that way, and I sort of feel that this could be part of that. And you know, I love working with all of you, so and learning with you. So but yeah, back to the text. I probably feel that in our system in Victoria, that workshop model and gradual release has had a big impact, and it's sort of had a really wide reach, and there's a lot of consistency with the language. I do feel that I've probably the last couple of years, or maybe it's longer because of COVID, but felt that workshop can be a bit rigid in people's practice and way of thinking, where I see it as being really flexible within that structure. And I think for me, it was pretty timely when I read this, and there's probably some things that, you know, I want to talk to in relation to that. One of my concerns with workshop is when I go into schools and it's a bit of a script, and it's probably, you know, and you all probably know I have the saying, you know, best job in the world, hardest job in the world. But I do feel that we overcomplicate it at times as well. And I'm really interested to hear your thinking in relation to this. And I'd like it to be practical. So I realise how busy we all are, and, you know, a lot of learning specialists in the group. So I'm wondering how much of this can end up being practical, that whatever we sort of discuss, that part of our second session, we read chapter 2, but it's also reporting back from our 4 schools, you know, what's worked, what have we learned, what are we excited about, what are our questions. Let's hurl them at Debbie Miller, see if she can join us, see if she wants to you know, answer them, or can't hurt. So that's probably some of my thinking. Any questions or any comments at that point?
I'll jump in there, Danny. I love the idea of kind of holding ourselves accountable to trying new things back at school. Like Dee and I had a really excited conversation at school today, even in some planning at our school, embedding some things that we've been reading already. So I'm really excited about the practical element of the chapter and things that we can be trying like straight away.
Love it. Thanks, Eleanor.
Yeah, and I'll just add, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, Dee. Just a lot of this chapter resonated with what we're trying to do at our school at the moment in relation to what we're calling the best lesson. So the structure of the best lesson, and it's all come from the teachers and looking at the workshop model, but also looking at a few other models out there and creating something and putting that together. So a lot of what was in this particular chapter is what is coming out through our school as well, with looking at things like, our conferencing as the main part of our lessons and admiring lenses and those sorts of things. So it was a great chapter to read.
Great to hear. Thanks, Dearnne. Dee, you were going to share?
Yeah, I think it's I can kind of add to what Dearnne has said and Elena, because I think we felt it quite timely. And I don't know if Erin, you probably feel it maybe too from just before Christmas, that a lot of what's been shared in this chapter, I just feel like it's exactly what we needed to hear, to be honest, to reassure us on a lot of levels. But it said so much that we could run with some of this already in our planning, our collaborative planning yesterday and today. And it made so much sense to staff when, we suggested some of the share questions from page 22 for teachers and for students. And it just actually organically was so holistic in finding its place within the lessons. When I mentioned some of the questions to staff, I think everybody was almost amazed by the simplicity of the questions. But then how powerful they were as well. And it was a real reflection of where we're at in our workshop model that, as you say, sometimes it can be quite rigid if it goes in a certain way. And I think some of the questions, particularly from that page, really helped us to reflect and remind ourselves of what we're doing. It's so valuable for our students. So they were quite simple, but they were extremely powerful, and staff ran with those questions in their planning for next week.
Yeah, I love that, Dee. Great share. Any other thinking? Okay. So one of the things for me, I do have a little PowerPoint presentation that I'll talk to, and would love to hear your thinking when I get through that. Probably to build on Dearnne's share, like I think this year in Victoria, like with the big focus on numeracy, that I guess in my work, I've been able to build instructional models around numeracy for almost from the ground up. So it has been collaborative. So there's been a lot of ownership and probably more depth to understanding with the instructional model. Whereas I find with literacy, we've been doing it for a fair while in our system, that I don't feel the same. I don't feel the same depth. I almost feel like we've had things in place, most schools, and then we've kind of adapted or modified to include gradual release and workshop. And in some schools, it's kind of been, trying to put a round shape in a square hole or vice versa, that we've just made it fit and maybe haven't really understood it to the same degree. Yeah, that's a broad generalization. But I think the high impact teaching strategies, I think one of the keys for workshop is that it ticks all of them, if you do it well in a lesson. And I think what Dearnne talked about with conferring is something that I always talk about, is we're not designed to learn with 25 others, and so differentiation is the biggest challenge I think we face as educators, and that's what workshop allows for. And gradual release, it allows you to hand over responsibility, and if you know your students, you know what the whole group needs, and then you can design how you're going to work with small groups. And with conferring, it's one-on-one, which cannot, it is the ultimate. That is how we differentiate the best possible way. I mean, it makes sense, but getting to that point consistently is obviously something that we need to work towards. So that's just some of my thinking. Might jump to the PowerPoint if that's okay. Hopefully this works. I'm kind of getting used to WebEx. Can you see that all right? Thumbs up? Yeah? Excuse my crude PowerPoint. And that's a bit blurry, but anyway. Debbie Miller sort of starts the book by saying the inspiration is really from this book, A More Beautiful Question. And so for me, it's like, I've already got too many books to read. I can't keep up. And, you know, I've added this one to the list. But I love the concept, and I love her questions in this chapter. And obviously that's how she's framed it up around what's the best that could happen. So, you know, my beautiful question is, how can we capture and build excellence across schools? And I think, you know, we've got 4 excellent schools being represented here tonight. And I think there's lots of opportunities because we do have consistency with a lot of things in Victoria. But I guess I'm pretty passionate about excellence, but I haven't got it in the question, but sustaining that excellence and probably culture is something that I haven't put in there. And I think as time has gone on, I've felt that the most important measure of a school is its culture, and how you measure that is complicated, I think. And I think that there are some resources and tools out there, but that's something that it really makes me think. The other thing that I also thought of it outside of education. So, and I'm thinking this for kids. And so one of the things that sticks in my mind is, would it be possible to eradicate all foxes in Australia? And what about rabbits? And then I'm wondering around if that was achieved, whether there'd be negative aspects to achieving that. And so I suppose it's a pretty broad, deep question and thinking. And I share it because I think that's what we want to engage our students with. That's the type of thinking that we want them to be exploring. And one of the themes, or in my notes in reading this chapter a couple of times, is giving kids time, giving students actual time. And I think Debbie Miller, she definitely explicitly states it, but I think that that's something that educators, we aren't good at. We're always flying so fast and I really love in particular how she just has one work time. You know, 2/3 of the lesson is just work time. And I think I can put my hand up for this, that maybe we've overcomplicated that a little bit by having 2 work times. You know, I know up at Cobram with Cass, we call it authentic. You know, every school's sort of got a bit of a different name. But I just wonder if, you know, we've overcomplicated it to some degree. And I know there needs to be scaffolds and entry points, which is kind of what this chapter is about as well, is to not over scaffold, you know, for kids. And, you know, that's one of my things I love about this chapter. In the writing course I took last year, we had to come up with our 12 favourite problems. And yes, I'm literacy and numeracy, so I haven't lost my mind. I know there's 20 questions there. But I think one of the things I'd like us to engage in is kind of journal around what our questions are, whether it be in education, whether it be around foxes and rabbits. And, you know, one of my other questions that I came up with was, is there a way to measure someone's immune system? So there's lots of things that I'm trying to be really metacognitive with, generally speaking, but I think that this book has really, well, so far, this book has really stimulated for me that I wonder if we can do that as educators and share that with kids. And I wonder if we can see what our kids come up with. And I'm wondering if that's something that might fall out of doing this work. Like, what are some of the things that we're going to trial? What are the things that we're going to practice and implement back at school? So these 12/20 favourite problems for me, in doing it, the logic is that's what you'll keep coming back to. That's what you'll keep writing about. So for me, this is what I probably do keep coming back to, and I probably need to revisit, and I probably have more questions that I could add to. But I think a lot of them here, we don't have time tonight, but it would be, you know, you could have a conversation around that could take the full hour, you know, that, you know, I'd love to do over a coffee or something like that. But anyway, I think the question generation is something that I'm interested in what you all are coming up with, if there's any. Another text that keeps coming up for me, we refer it to leading literacy in vocab, and lo and behold, you know, Debbie Miller's referencing it here. And I guess for me, I think you all probably know Kay. So Kay's obviously been a huge influence on me, or probably, yeah, clearly the number one influence on me as an educator. And I can see the influence that these educators have had on Kay. And so I can almost track the pathway of how it's come to me, you know, secondhand in a way. Workshop. So I need to probably go back and retrace this. I think it was Chris Tavani that was the first one that I'm aware of that sort of had this circular model. And, you know, I've already talked to this, but I think we want to make sure that our staff are aware of the flexibility. So I think if you look at it and sort of go, well, 1/3, you know, or a quarter of the lesson is probably the mini lesson, and maybe 1/5 is the debrief or share time, which is probably long. So 1/5 of 60 minutes is 12. So, you know, I probably think 5 to 7 minutes, but I think, you know, you want to be flexible. You know, some days it might be that it's a 10-minute share time or debrief. And I'm thinking about Debbie Miller's questions. We've got to give kids time, and we've got to let them talk, and we've got to let them learn from each other, and I've got to listen in and hear. So, but I think the key thing is really that 2/3, that independent work time. And I think that most people struggle with that and grapple with that around, well, what do they do for all that time? And I really like how some of the ideas that Debbie Miller shares in this chapter around what that can look like. And I think it does take a high level of expertise and practice, but I think that with coaching and with support that I think that it can only lead to really, you know, outstanding outcomes if we can get to a really clear understanding of this, and our students could really thrive even more. This is something I talk to a lot. So I've got lots and lots of annotations from the chapter. I chose this one in particular. I talk about this a lot. You know, the quote, "We get into trouble when we are so eager for student success that we eliminate opportunities for struggle." And sometimes, I don't know, we're not good at seeing ourselves through other people's eyes. I guess I've learned that I have really high expectations. I think I'm probably nice about that, you know, that I just believe that all kids can achieve, and we'll get there in the end. And I do feel that we sort of can have a bit of a deficit model, that we can really gravitate to the kids that are low and below. And don't get me wrong, they need more time than any other student in the class, but it needs to be balanced. And I talk to a lot of educators around what you actually are teaching them by over scaffolding is you're teaching them that they're reliant on you, and they're very dependent. And over time, you know, they get to 3, 4, 5, 6 secondary school. We've actually really disempowered them. And yes, they've got significant challenges. But I think that that's something, and I'm really big on, well, if they're not disrupting other students, let them be, you know, like, and I think, you know, we'll get to Emiliano, but I think the example is fantastic. And it is a success story. I don't think you're always going to nail it. Well, you know, if Debbie Miller comes on and joins us, we'll ask her, you know, maybe sometimes where it hasn't worked, you know. But I think if we play the long game, I'm really big on, well, we've got to really stretch our top kids as well. And, you know, I do see a lot, and I think there's a lot of noise in our system and maybe education in general around magic bullet solutions for those low kids. And so that's something that I talk about a lot. Another thing is agency. I love the definition in the chapter. I don't know how long agency has been a buzzword in our system. I think Mary Jean Gallagher's resource around Amplify is excellent. I guess I tease teachers a bit, or educators, and sort of say, you know, we're all rah, yeah, I love agency. But we also love control. And so we actually don't allow our students to have that agency. And I think it's such a powerful example that Debbie Miller sort of shares in this chapter. And I'll have to admit, I don't think it's been that long that I've probably had clarity around, well, what does agency actually mean? And I think that there's some implications there back at school. You know, there's a lot of strategic plans and AIPs that have it in there, but I really wonder, you know, do we have clarity around what agency is and what that looks like? And I wonder if that's something that, again, might fall out of the work we do here in our study group. And then there's some sort of anchor chart sort of things that, you know, I just love. One of the things I've really struggled with for a long time is benchmarks and leveled readers. And I think, Dee, you talked about, you know, how simple Debbie Miller explains it in a way that's really simplified, but really clear and really powerful. And, you know, I absolutely love the question, and that they're framed as questions, you know, for what does make an actual just right book here. And again, implications are, you know, for our kids, for our colleagues. You know, how do we increase stamina and student agency? I've been really lucky to work in some schools where in foundation the bar has been super high for kids, really scaffolded, but really stretching the kids and giving them stamina and student agency from day one. And, you know, I think the schools represented here tonight are clearly part of that. I think Rory Alec does it really well. I'm at Cobram a lot. I think they do it really well. I just think, you know, it's something that if we get right from day one, kids come into foundation, we've got high expectations, we wrap our arms around them, but, you know, we really have that bar raised really, really high. So, yeah, I loved the examples on that as well. Really liked the coaching questions. There's so many quality questions, I think, in this chapter. You know, the two that I've sort of pulled out, you know, is you know, on the screen, what did you learn about yourself as a teacher and your students as, and I put in brackets, readers that you didn't know before. I think readers can be replaced with writers. mathematicians, historians, scientists. I don't think it matters. I think what a great question. And I think, you know, going back to best job in the world, hardest job in the world, let's keep it simple. You know, what are your goals for tomorrow based on what you learned today? And getting, you know, providing time for teachers to be reflective. And one of the things I learned from Kay, which I think I'm pretty sure Kay took from Debbie Miller, was Debbie Miller would think about what do my kids need? What's the number one thing that they all need? Then that's what I need to model. That's my learning intention. That's the focus of tomorrow's lesson. And that's what they'll, you know, focus on in their independent work. And obviously people like Kay and Debbie Miller have such great content knowledge that there's a lot to call on. But I do think that we can overcomplicate things, and we need to share with our students. You know, this is why we're learning what we're learning today, because of what I learned about you yesterday, etc. So, and last slide, and then love to hear your thoughts, Emiliano, and I love the patience, I love the questioning, I love the mindset. I think that you just can't, you know, again, I think in conjunction with the knowledge that Debbie Miller has, just the mindset is just, is on point. And I shared this chapter with a school last week with ES staff. So ES staff are going to read it, and they've already messaged me, you know, saying, hey, took so much out of this chapter, and, you know, I'm working with this young student, blah, blah, blah. And I think it is just that mind frame shift on how to look, and it's not that deficit model, you know. So anyway, there's some of my thoughts. I love to sort of be kind of building on each other here, like what we're thinking, and making sure we all include each other, that sort of thing. But I'll throw it over. Rock, paper, scissors, who goes first?
I'll just jump in. I got rock, so everybody else must have had whatever rock beats. I can't even.
Scissors.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I have a baby. I can't do anything. Danny, I loved what you said about the flexibility, and yeah, I noticed that too about what Debbie had, you know, the one work time, like that huge circle. When I think about the last workshop circle I drew, it was a lot more complicated than that, putting together some PD with Dee. I guess one of my questions or thought bubbles or concerns in having that flexibility, I think that's really important, but is then the consistency and accountability across the school. I think in a magical unicorn world, you know, you can say to your teachers, here, have these, you know, 45 minutes of independent work time, go and meet the needs of your students, and, you know, do your conferences. But not every teacher is going to use that time as effectively as every other teacher. So for some teachers, maybe they need to have that, you know, first work time I get my conferences done, second work time I take a small group. And teachers also need to kind of have that confidence of knowing what the students are doing as well, and being aware of what's happening in that huge expanse of work time. I think that's just something to think about in how do you bridge that gap between the flexibility and the consistency and accountability. And I think the same thing with planning as well, like you were saying about, you know, the flexibility to say, this is what I noticed in my students today, so I'm going to do this tomorrow. How do you do that and then also have consistency and guaranteed and viable curriculum across all the grade levels, you know, all the classes in grade 3, 4, or whatever it is? Admiring lens, though, I'm sure it's great.
I think they're great questions. You know, my initial thoughts, and then I'll throw it over if anyone else wants to jump on, is I think you identify your champions, you know, who are going to be able to run with this, and that's why I think coaching is so important, so that, you know, what is the next step, and how do we stretch? And I think those questions that I had on the slide really, you know, will enable that, you know, if someone is ready for that sort of next step. What, any other thoughts, or does it connect to anyone else's thinking?
Yeah, I can jump in, and really, Erin, we're still in the same headspace. Because I was thinking, you know, I had some questions that I'd sent you, Danny, around, like, you know, do our teachers understand agency in the context of even just student learning outside of the workshop model? Just, you know, I think it is a mind frame that some people just have, or have learned to develop over the years in their practice. And I think there's that kind of question even before developing professional learning, and where do you target, you know, that concept of agency? And then I guess, because I was thinking professional learning wise, how would you unpack something like this? And as Erin said, bridge that step, you know, to make it work where we're at right now in our school. And is the next step for us as teachers to, you know, can we kind of re-explore how we empower our students through this way of thinking and this lens of teaching? You know, Debbie Miller's really sharing with us in this chapter. So I'm kind of with Erin on that, like, how would, like, I love it, and I get it, and it makes sense to me, but how do you share that across the diversity of your staff as well?
So from our school's perspective on agency and developing and understanding around agency, we did a lot of professional learning with staff last year, and did the modules on the department website in relation to student voice, agency and leadership. And we have a working committee around that for the school, and providing professional learning and a scope and sequence. But we did a lot of background work around that last year. So this year, it's very straight in people's minds about what agency does look like and what student voice looks like, and the difference between those things. And so then we've created this best lesson model, which is based on an instructional model that goes across all curriculum areas. So, and part of that is based on that workshop model. But we had to really get it clear to staff first about what does agency look like and what does student voice look like before you can implement that in the classroom. So now this year it's sort of running fairly smoothly, but there's still a lot of work to be done, in the sense of when we're conferencing with students, that agency does come out, because we're setting goals with the students, and we're spending time every 2 to 3 weeks going and reflecting back on those student goals. So they only last 2 to 3 weeks in their reading, and they're working on those in their independent reading time. And they've got those visually present in front of them all of the time on their desks, so they know what they're looking at when they're doing their independent reading and what they're trying to focus on, and the strategies they've discussed through conferencing with the teachers. It's still a work in progress, but that's the direction we're taking.
Dearnne, I really liked that comment you made, that your teachers needed to know what that agency looks like and what voice looks like, and the differences between those, because I think that's can be a real stumbling block sometimes. You know, we can read the theory about these things till we're blue in the face, but if you don't actually know what it can look like in your classroom, or should look like, you know, what's that kind of high expectations, it's hard for teachers to work towards it. So I think that's really cool what you guys did.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. I'd be interested in hearing more about that, Dearnne. I think that a lot of teachers do actually know, you know, what agency is. I believe, I agree completely with Danny in that what he said before, some teachers can't lose that control, and they know in theory what it's supposed to look like, but can't necessarily implement it. I think there's also a fine line between scaffolding enough and sort of you know, underdo it and the child is overwhelmed and it's too big a task, overdo it and you take away that sense of control, and they go, you know, towards the disengagement. So yeah, that's really interesting, and yeah, I'd like to hear more about that.
Megan or Eleanor?
I'm just finding myself agreeing with everything everyone's saying. And I don't know what to say, but I think definitely what you said, Cassie, about that fine line, that's something that definitely stood out to me. And I think, like, I'll admit, I'm definitely a control freak. I'm one of those teachers who likes my environment the way I like it. So for me, it's something that really resonated with me, finding that middle ground between scaffolding our students enough so that, you know, they can achieve something, but then not too much, because yeah, we don't want to make it too easy for them where they're not actually getting the opportunity to do things for themselves anymore. So yeah, something I'm going to continue thinking about, definitely.
I know in myself, in my own job, if someone sort of overdid it and told me the steps I needed to take for success, I'd be like, well, why don't you just do it yourself? So, you know, you take away that sense of control for them, and yeah, they're completely sort of dig their heels in, and they're just doing it because you want them to do it, and that doesn't sit right. And that brings itself, you know, within itself all sorts of feelings of disengagement and why do I bother? And I hate school. I'm here because I have to be here, and that sort of thing. So
Go down.
So when we do our conferencing, we always start the discussion with glows, what we call glows, with the students. So give them those admiring positive points, and then we talk about grows with them. But we also, I mean, I've got a year 4, so you can have that conversation with them. But we also talk about what do they think they need to work on. So giving them that ownership of where they're taking their learning. And then we talk about the strategies.
And I think that in itself is a skill, because some kids are just completely on the wrong track, and you need to make them believe that they've got some ownership over it. So, yeah.
Megan?
Yeah, oh, look, this is just so interesting to listen to. I think from my perspective with our little preppies, we're really working with a group of or a cohort of children who have missed 2 years at kinder. And so we're really still setting up our writing workshop, our writers community. And I think the pivotal point for me, I've got a lot of interesting behaviour. So I really connected with the little boy in this chapter. The breakthrough for me was, instead of just trying to get everybody on the right track and doing the right thing in the classroom, was I sort of stepped back and started conferring. And it has been the most incredible hook, because the children now know that that time is just such a special time, and they're growing and improving so quickly, just having that time, and the others want it. So they're now, their behaviour's completely switched, and they're working really, really well in their independent work time, because they know that it will be their turn to either work in a small group or have that one-on-one conferring time as well. So I think the link between, you know, promoting student agency, boosting self-esteem, and listening and getting to know your learners, it's just so interwoven.
So the one big thing that jumps out to me, there's 2 things. First one is, I think Cassie probably would have to get on a bus or drive the 3 hours. But I guess one of the things that could be an action that comes out of this is, you know, Clarinda and Hughesdale are very close to each other. Mount Waverley's not that far away. That, you know, we've got PP days, I think, back on the table. You know, I mean, there's so many options that are available to educators for what you might want to focus on, but it may very well be that you sort of go, well, hey, let's have a, we're doing, Dearnne sounds like they're doing some really good work around agency. We're going to go check that out. I think every school has got some things that would be worth having some discussions around. I think, the 3 schools that are fairly close to each other, you could just do it over a morning, when it worked. And obviously through the rollout of tonight, everyone's email addresses are sort of in there. So, I'm happy to help liaise. I don't think you need me to, but I'm happy to coordinate as well. The other one is, I think we need to make sure, I think we want to think about agency with everything, but I want us to be thinking around it in terms of the tasks that we set students. And I think that the key thing that Debbie Miller highlights is, even though it was probably too hard a task for Emiliano, he had time to persist. And, there was time to reflect and those sorts of things. And there's so much of this that I think goes across everything. Cass and Cobram would be the school that I work with the most. And we've just done a fair bit of work around close reading and how, the scaffolds from that and repeatedly reading something and, and making sure that it's too complex for students. And so that when they actually engage with the text, that you're actually being really explicit for them around the strategies they need to employ to be able to navigate the text that's too complex. And so then over time, those strategies, they apply to whatever they're reading, and therefore they grow stronger. And obviously in a reader's workshop, in independent reading time, we're reading just right books, which Debbie Miller is showing us, there's variations on what that might be. But the issue can be with independent reading that if I'm reading just right books, then I'm never really reading text that stretches me too far. And therefore, what strategies do I employ when I come across that? And we're all, as a group here, primary, in my secondary work, the number one thing would be that students can decode the text that they're exposed to in secondary, but there's a whole heap that they just don't understand. And if they don't have strategies, effective strategies, when they're reading that, straight over, gone, don't understand, and we move on. And so I guess I can really see the parallels between the example with Emiliano and the work that we've been doing up at Cobram around close reading, and I think it goes for everything. Anyone else want to share some thinking?
I'll just jump in here and say, I think reading the part about, what just right books are and the fluidity of just right books was almost like a light bulb moment for me. I think I really felt a bit guilty after reading that page because it made so much sense. And I found myself reflecting on conferences I'd had with students and setting goals in the past with students about making sure they're choosing just right books, making sure they, can read it and it's appropriate for them. But it really made me think, is that the best thing that I'm doing for these students? Like, what do we want the end goal to be? We want our students to be engaged and, motivated in their learning. So we need more of their student voice in what they want to read, and we need to let them have more input in it. And I think, just the fluidity of how we see just right books was a really big takeaway for me from this chapter.
I love that. I guess you're almost sharing, though, Elle, how you would go about this and that student voice. And I think that, I just picture that you could be videoing random kids and saying, well, why are these books in your book box? Why have you chosen them? Why are they just right? And I think that, again, if we slow down, if reading's our focus in our school, it's got to be some of the discussions that we're having. And, you know, I've always struggled with level text and readers and those sorts of things. And again, I think Dee talked about it at the start. I think she just simplifies the issues with them, but how to counteract it.
I think too, building on that, the workshop model diagram that's on page 8, that's how there's agency in the workshop. I think, Danny, you had it in your PowerPoint before. That really puts it back on the students. And I think Just Right books are the same thing, Elle, like you're saying. You know, we want them to read them so that they're engaged and so that they're growing as readers and becoming better readers. And that idea that, you know, independent work time, the purpose of that is I will read, talk, write to get smarter and grow as a reader. If we're actually making that explicit and clear to our students, then the books they're reading take on a new purpose. You know, if independent work time is all about you growing as a reader or as a person or whatever it is, as a learner, then you need to think more carefully about the book that you're choosing, because it's designed to help you grow. And I just love the idea of making this really explicit to our students, whether that's at the start of the year when establishing the workshop, or whether it's, you know, done later in the year. But yeah, I love the idea of kind of putting that on them, that this is what the workshop is. It's your workshop, or your lesson, or, you know, whatever your school calls it. You need to use your time for yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. I really love that thinking. For me, it was the implications for our unit around creating a community of readers. And I think it's same for creating a community of writers, to be honest. That I think it may be that it's takes more time, but I think it needs to be introduced at the start of the year. And I think our preppies and every year, you know, our students just get stronger with that unit and the behaviours and routines that we're looking for.
I think a crucial part of all of this is giving the children time to talk with each other. So not only just learning how to choose just right books, but actually having that conversation. It's not quiet time and just thinking by themselves. It's that time to turn and talk and have those really in-depth conversations about what they're reading. I think that's really important too.
I think there's huge implications as well for classroom libraries and quality literature and lots of that I think every year we've just got to be spending a good amount of money out of our budgets. It is close to 8:30. I think we've got time for a couple more thoughts if there is any.
I just have a very quick one, Danny.
Yes, go Dee.
It's really simple, but I just love when she explores imagining new possibilities for a child, and just the simple act of sharing the discovery of what could be possible when you remove all the blockers and obstacles for a child and just let them dream, I guess, and let them have, you know, an openness to what could be possible for them. And on page 10, she has that little kind of, it's like a little visual or illustration of what she imagines for Emiliano. It looks like it's stuck in, and I just think it's really profound because it brings us back to why we're teachers and why we're doing what we're doing. It's just very simple, but it just really brought me back to even, like, you know, one of the examples she said was, I imagine him as the kind of kid who was proud of who he is becoming. You know, it's quite a humbling part of the chapter, I think.
I think for me, Dee, like, I couldn't agree more, but I also connected, like, for myself in, you know, when Debbie's listed the things where she has agency as a writer, and how that transfers to other parts of her life. You know, it's not just when she goes to write, and she has good days and bad days with that. And it makes me think of resilience, that again, that's been something that has been a buzzword, you know, and how do we do that in schools? Well, I think agency is a big part of it. You know, if we don't give our kids agency, all we're doing is talking about resilience. We're actually never, there's no struggle. You know, we're always scaffolding and supporting, and it's well-intentioned. We're saving everyone, but we're actually not. And I just think that we need our students to have that struggle and to persist, and they know we're there to support them and catch them. But I think we're catching them before they need catching pretty regularly, I feel.
I feel like maybe that we're not stretching them enough. It sort of sparks the conversation between Just Right books and interest books. And Emiliano clearly really loved to read about butterflies, and it wasn't necessarily a Just Right book, but he got through it. It's about stretching through their interest and sparking that curiosity, and creating a sense of wonder, and that you know, books are the way to find out your, you know, answers to your curiosities, and we need to spark that in children more. And so it's not just always about what's in your book box. Is it a Just Right book? I think it's needs to be a really healthy balance between interest books and Just Right books.
Thanks, Cass. Dearnne, I think you might have gone.
Yeah, I just really agreed with what you were saying too, Danny, in relation to agency and how I put down how it builds resilience, but it also builds other traits like confidence and initiative and being able to cope in the real world. So we're really supporting them developing those real world skills, I think.
Yeah,
there was one other part that talks about helping that child develop new habits and routines to allow them to try a new identity. And I think that, you know, when they have that opportunity for that struggle, and then we spend that time with the child to then talk about, you know, when learning has felt hard, and promote that strategic activities that they can, you know, strengthen their capabilities. They end up having some really, really rich learning experiences and growing.
Definitely. All right, ladies, I think we'll wind things up there. So it's a democracy. Obviously, we know that more than any other time, given we're in election mode, and we've got another one in November, aren't we lucky? So I'm probably going to propose, but be flexible, that we meet again in week 8 or 9. If it's too hectic, you know, I think we'll push it to early next term. We've got 5 chapters. You know, it's not a really long text. You know, I am mindful though, you know, I don't want this to become a burden or anything like that. So I'll probably send an email in a couple of weeks, sort of with a proposed date or time. I think Wednesdays was probably the sweet spot for most people who registered some interest. So I'm looking for, out of tonight, for the start of next session, some sharebacks, you know, anything to do with this first chapter, you know, whether there's some adjustments to workshop, anything around agency, you know, etc., that I think that would be good.